everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. We were off last week. I don't know why I said we. It's just me. I do everything. I was off last week because, the city's on fire. And so, packing all your bags and finding all your documents and putting them in a backpack so you can flee if you have to. It took up a good chunk of the week. So I'm recording this, and, not only is fascism kind of just hanging over our heads like one of those pendulums with a sharp axe type thing. I don't know what you call those. Just kind of swinging over us. But David Lynch just passed away. And, 2025. I don't blame the year. I blame the fact that the ruling elite started pushing back against the gains labor had made by the 70s and created a plan to do that and then enacted that plan. It didn't work out exactly like they expected. There were some setbacks, but hey, by 2025, they figured it out. Of course, you can listen to how that all worked out on the Lever? How do you pronounce the name of that? The Levers Master Plan podcast with former guest David Sirota. But enough doom and gloom. All right, I've got a great episode for you today that hopefully will take the edge off of the nightmare shitstorm we are all living through. Today's episode is Sunroof. And if you don't know who Sunroof is, I'm going to read you their bio right now. Daniel Miller and Gareth Jones of Sunroof have had long, varied careers for decades as musicians, music producers, and more. Daniel is the founder of Mute Records, which have released albums from numerous groups including Depeche Mode, New Order, Wire, Nick Cave, and many others. And as a producer, Gareth has worked with many of those same bands and more, including Interpol, Grizzly Bear, Madness, and that's just a small sampling. The two began collaborating together in 1982 when Daniel asked Gareth to work with him on what became Depeche Mode's Construction Time Again. After Depeche Mode had gone home for the day, the two would stay on to work on their own sessions. This became Sunroof, and they worked mostly as a remix project. However, in 2019, they started improvising together with modular systems as a lark and enjoyed the results. They've recorded 3 fantastic albums, and their latest, Electronic Music Improvisation Volume 3, came out at the end of November, and folks, it's wonderful. I got the album as kind of a promo, and I was listening to it, and a lot of times, I'll get a lot of promos from publicists, and I listen to them, and most of them are fine. They're not bad, but it doesn't grab me. And I had such an emotional reaction to Daniel and Gareth's music that I was like, I have to talk to these guys. And I was so glad that they were open to being on the show because this is a really fun episode, really interesting. They both have fascinating paths, and I hope you enjoy our talk. Coming up on the show, I have a lot of cool episodes. I just talked with Jack Pendarvis, wonderful author and also a writer on Adventure Time. Coming up next week, Seth Gordon, comedy director, also was the director of King of Kong. Jamie McKelvey, credible comic artist. Josh Satuner, who is the showrunner and creator of Say Nothing, one of the best TV shows of last year. So stay tuned for those, but for now, let's talk to Daniel and Gareth. When you're recording someone or when you are recording yourself and it's going really well, does the anxiety creep in? Or are either of you or both of you, are you people who can be present in the moment?
I think I can be. I think in the work that we do together, Gareth and I, we are. I think that's part of the excitement of it. I think we kind of have to be, actually. Otherwise, I don't think it would work. What do you say, Gareth?
No, I agree, especially in the context of improvisation. It's all about being in the moment and listening to what's going on around us, I guess. And we've got, I mean, our recording setup is very simple as Sunroof, because it's a basic 4-channel recording. So any anxiety, if we were recording a symphony orchestra or something, I'm sure I would feel slightly anxious. Is it actually working, the recording? But when it's Sunroof, I think we're fairly confident that we can manage to do a 4-track Ableton recording without the building burning down,
And even if it did burn down, we could just do another take, and it wouldn't be the end of the world.
In the context of Sunroof, I completely agree with you, Daniel. If we fail to get a recording, I think we'd feel, it did happen to us recently. We played a wonderful support gig for our dear friend Vince Clarke of his solo show in London. He invited us to support him. And I always try and record the sessions that we do live, because you never know, obviously it's great to have a recording. And we came on stage to start our set, and I pressed record on the Zoom, and the memory card was full. And for a moment, I just freaked out. I didn't have the presence of mind to reformat the memory card or anything. So we just did the gig without recording. And funnily enough, in retrospect, we both felt it was one of our most satisfying, minimal, detailed, enjoyable gigs ever. And we failed to record it. But hey, that's just what happened.
Well, do you think there was like a Heisenberg type thing where because it wasn't recording, you knew that there was no future observer to this, so it was purely in the moment? Does that make any sense at all as a question?
Not to me, because I didn't know it wasn't recording at the time. You said anything, did you, Gareth? I can't remember.
Oh, that's interesting that's your memory of it, because I remember you saying afterwards that perhaps it was such a great gig because we knew it wasn't recording.
Oh, maybe I said that. I can't remember.
I think we have. It's interesting memory, isn't it? Our life is made of.
Well, my SD card is pretty full at the moment, so my memory might be everything.
Your internal SD card. Yeah, I was listening to a documentary about Werner Herzog yesterday. It's a super interesting documentary, Radical Dreamer it's called. And one of the things he said is, we live partially in a world of fantasy that we have created. How does memory relate to that? And that's a little example of it, our gig, isn't it? We're living in this fantasy world where I'm fantasizing that we both knew, but did we both know? I don't know.
Well, if I said that, I probably did know. But anyway,
I mean, if you live in America, you live mostly in fantasy, so I don't know if that fits here.
Horror film, fantasy, horror fantasy.
Soon, yes. But yeah, no, I think this is. I think this stuff is really interesting because also I am curious. You have been making music for decades, and so you've seen a change in culture, or maybe not. And this is, I guess, where the question is going, where it used to be, you could let something go. If there, like a live performance was just a live performance, obviously if you wanted to record it, you could, but it didn't feel like, it feels like now everyone, and maybe this is just in comedy, where everyone's like filming everything and trying to cut it into content. And maybe it's that change from art to content, but I don't know. But have you seen that change, or is this just a thing that I've made up and like, oh, everything's so different now, but it's always been the same? You know what I mean?
Well, a lot of things are different now. It's very, very annoying to be at a concert where people are looking at it through their phones and probably recording it, and it's probably the sounds shit because they're just recording on their phone from a PA. And I don't know. I don't think we get that much of that, do we? I've noticed when we play live that we get film. Maybe I just don't know. I'm too focused on what I'm doing. But I'm not sure. It's not like going to a Depeche gig where everybody's filming and recording.
No, we don't have that level of. We don't quite have that reach yet, do we? As Sunroof. But no, I agree. It's also we're trying to engender well, I don't know. I mean, I'm very interested in this kind of shared collective experience when we improvise together with listeners there. it feels like some of our gigs are so small and intimate that, if the listeners make too much noise or make a noise, it has as much effect as us making a noise with the modular. It feels very much like a shared experience. So my memory of our little gigs is not a wall of phones. The phones come out afterwards when people want to photograph the modulars.
Yeah.
That's true.
They don't want to photograph us.
I know.
Do you think in general, though, do you think there has been a sea change from a collective experience to a kind of mass of individual experiences together? Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, it does. I just wanted to add that we do get like gentle criticism from our record company for not making content. For instance, when we meet for our recording sessions, we're so interested in the music and so focused on the sound and the timbres and the noise that we're making that we never video it or anything. And I think they one of the social media people at the record company has just given up. She realizes that we just are not going to ever deliver any content apart from the music. But it's definitely a thing. What you're saying is, the content's as important, content's as important or more important almost than the music, it seems sometimes. And your question was slightly different from that, wasn't it? It was about, sorry, remind me of what you said, Andy.
Well, it's interesting because you called a live performance a collective experience. And I think I haven't really been to a show in a while, but the last one I was at, I don't remember a lot of people having their phones out, and it did feel collective in a way that when people do have all their phones out, it feels like everyone's in their own kind of bespoke world.
Yeah.
As opposed to being there and present. And I'm not saying it's good or bad necessarily. I do like, that Walter Benjamin Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, where he's talking about, you're not getting the aura of the artwork anymore because you're now seeing it on a postcard, but also everyone can see this without having to travel to London. So it's democratized in a way. So there's good and bad. So I'm not like trying to say like the modern age is so awful. I'm just saying it's a different experience. I'm curious about if you have seen that sea change, or if it's just like, no, I just make my art and then I let it go into the world.
I mean, it bothers me more as a member of the audience than as a performer. I think it becomes very individualistic when people are filming on their phones because they lose all sense of other people around them. And they don't really care if they're blocking somebody's view, or it's just about them and they're hoping their desire to post something on Instagram or wherever. It's a shame. I remember not that long ago, there's a club in Berlin called Berghain, which at the weekends is a techno club and during the week has some concerts. And there are two things about it. One is you're allowed to smoke in the venue, and the second thing is you're not allowed to take pictures in the venue. So when you see a band there, it's like flashback to the it feels like the 70s, but not that long ago, where everybody's smoking, nobody's taking pictures, and you can just hear the music. I saw quite a few Swans I saw in that context. Makes a huge difference. Really makes a huge difference. Then it really does feel like a collective experience, But I'm sure that when you go and see Taylor Swift at Wembley Stadium, that's also a massive collective experience. Yet I'm sure there's loads of people filming. I don't know. It's a pretty grey area, I think. I don't really know the answer to the question.
I have a insight about this, or a recognition, because there's this idea. It seems to me in culture now that this individualistic idea that how separate we all are and we're pursuing our own agendas, and yet it's completely manufactured, this separateness. I'm wearing clothes that someone else made. I'm talking to you on a microphone that someone made. Someone else made the electricity. Someone built the room that I'm in. Someone grew the food that I ate this morning. And it goes on and on and on. We're all embedded in this huge web, this huge network of humanity making stuff together. and yet people pursue these agendas as though we're not all one, and yet we clearly are. How, you can't use an iPhone and pretend you're an individual, because how many million people are involved in the production of an iPhone, the science even involved in it that goes back thousands of years, Anyway, so I just thought I'd throw that in.
I mean, I was joking when I said you live in a fantasy land here in America, but there is the like, you don't think that there's a factory in China of essentially slave labor making this thing that you use, or half the stuff that we use, right? I don't know how it is in the UK. I'm sure it's great under Keir. I'm sure he's doing a bang up job, but but it is very much, you are disconnected from that. It is this kind of libertarian, we're living out in America, this libertarian fantasy that like you can be on your own, even though you are completely dependent upon it. I was reading an article, like if society were to collapse, even the people who are doing like homesteading or have a bunker, they have maybe a month or two head start on the rest of us. That's it. It's not very long after the rest of society collapses that you person living in the woods in a cabin are not going to do well either. So I don't know.
Yeah, it is a fantasy. It is and we're standing on the shoulders of giants, aren't we? In as well, it's not just the manufacturers of the phone, as I tried to say. It's all the science that's gone into making all this stuff work. That goes back hundreds of years. Anyway.
Yeah. Why I'm asking some of this stuff, I mean, we just kind of improvised, got off on a tangent, but like, I am curious because you started making art in the 70s, right? Or earlier. I mean, how far back, you're both making music when you're children, aren't you?
Yeah. Art. I suppose it was art. I don't think anybody else thought it was art. I mean, art. Yeah, I was making music. Since I was like in my 11 or 12, I think. But I'm a hopeless musician and a very frustrated musician. But I was in bands at school right through from then till leaving. Even after leaving school, I was in a band. We had a band at school, and we had a lot of fun. But music, it wasn't very good, but we had a lot of fun, And I started out with guitar, then I kind of got into saxophone a bit and other things. Yeah. What was the question?
I don't know if it was a question as much as a prompt. I am curious, was it always music? I mean, what was, obviously you said you were not like, this band wasn't great, but like, was it, once you got in a band where you're like, oh, I want to make music my life? Or was it like, that was nice, and I have other things I'm interested in, Daniel?
I thought I would. I mean, I never thought I would make music my life because I was so useless at it. But we had fun, and I was obsessed with music from a very, very young, even before I can remember. I was, my parents used to say I used to stand over the gramophone, just wanting to hear Three Blind Mice over and over again. And I don't remember that, but but I was pretty obsessed by music right from the beginning. And I suppose the big change was the beat boom of the 60s, early 60s, all the bands you could imagine, Stones, Beatles, Kinks, etc., etc. And I was very picky as well. I wasn't a fan of a band because I was always say, well, that Beatles singles, that's, I really like Please Please Me, but She Loves You was shit. I wasn't like one of those people, and I moved on quite quickly to other things. But I was always very into music and always wanted to be able to play music and kind of express myself, but found it very frustrating that I couldn't really do that in the way that I wanted to.
Was there, I want to ask you in a second, Gareth, but Daniel, was there a way you could express yourself through art, through writing? Could you talk to people? Did you feel okay talking to people and expressing your emotions, or was it all kind of bottled up?
Well, yeah, I mean, talking about emotions, don't, forget it. Especially in those days, But But I did have a period where I was just playing guitar with a metal file when I was about 13 or 14 on my own. And I think that was more like, I felt probably more musically satisfied with that than anything else I'd ever done. So I can't remember why I stopped or anything. I can't remember anything apart from doing it for a while and enjoying it. But I mean, it's different. You know, I'm an only child. That makes a big difference in terms of communication and sharing thoughts. You know, it's good. There are positives and negatives about being an only child, but I didn't have an older brother or sister to show me about music, to tell me about, you know, the classic thing where you have an older brother or sister and they play you the new Stones album and you've never quite heard it before, you know.
Yeah.
But I did have friends at school. I think because I was so into music, I gravitated to other people who were into music, slightly older kids as well, and they would guide me a little bit and play me the new John Mayall album and things like that. So that was good. But yeah.
Was the metal file just instinct? You're like, I want to see what this is, what it would sound like on the guitar, or was it you had seen, like, I don't know, some avant-garde thing on somewhere and you're like, oh, I'll try that?
No, it's just, no, I didn't even know what the word avant-garde meant or what it meant, what it was. No, I don't know. I think it was just lying around. I was playing around on my own and I saw it lying around. I thought, I wonder what that sounds like. I think I mean, yeah, it's quite a while ago now, but but it definitely wasn't influenced by me having seen or heard something else. No.
Gareth, what about you? Was it always music? Was there other ways you could express yourself or wanted to?
Well, passionate music lover from early days, all around my father's record collection, I suppose. So, you know, I heard, you know, some of my father's records when I was in the womb already. So it was, you know, goes way back. A couple of things I want to add. I never, in the terms of my schooling and my upbringing all those decades ago, music was never thought of as a viable career path. So really, it was only a bit later in life when I got away from home and went to college that I started to gradually this idea formed that I might be able to make a life path in music and in recording. Recording is what I've always been really interested in. Recorded music is deep in my soul, partly, as I said, because of all the great musical experiences I had as a child that were largely from records. You know, emerging middle class in the 50s, early 60s, people had gramophones and they could play records of incredible pieces of art that otherwise we never would have had access to. So that was clearly transformative for me. I don't really feel anymore when I make music that I'm expressing myself. I do experience it in terms of being an open channel. I try to keep an open channel through my practice of interfacing with the instruments and performing, if you like, making noise. I keep the channel open, and I feel that some kind of, not to get too religious about this, but some kind of higher energy is distilled through us as I feel like a tool or a vessel. You know, the universe is full of creative energy, and one of my jobs as an artist is to concretize that energy in some form or another. And it turns out that I've, partly, I suppose, because of my huge love of music, like Daniel, we you know, from very early days, then it's turned out to be a musical concretization of this energy. I hesitate to talk about me expressing myself anymore.
Yeah. No, I've gotten in trouble for reducing things to expression before on this show. And
I was, Andy, when I used to play the piano as a teenager in the school hall, cavernous and reverb, banging out chord progressions, I definitely felt I was expressing myself back then. You know, it's some huge kind of emotional outpouring. But you know, looking back, I'm not sure it had much value to the listener. As Daniel said, so I did. There was a phase. I was only able to complete musical projects, of my own composition, if you like, of our own composition. When I stopped thinking of it, when I stopped trying to express myself, it's a different process somehow.
No, I like what you said because, like I said, I sometimes just reduce it to expression when it is, sometimes it's just, well, I had fun doing this thing. Sometimes it's just this libidinal kind of, or like you said, I really like that, the idea of concretizing a moment in music or in art or whatever you're doing. You are taking this energy that is there and putting it and transmuting it, doing some kind of alchemy. And I don't mean that in like a cheesy way, like it was alchemy. What we were doing was alchemy. I mean it literally in this kind of like, yes, we took whatever that feeling was, the vibe was in the room, and changed into this other thing.
There is a sense with the electronic music, modular electronics that we as Sunroof enjoy so much. The actual energy is electricity that comes out the wall. And really what we're doing, which is raw noise, really what we're doing is we're sculpting that energy with the tools into what some people call music.
And you feel that energy when you're plugging ones, because it's all wires connected to different things. You somehow feel that energy passing through the wires. You're connecting energy. It's actually quite nice.
Yeah.
Quite nice feeling.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. I think why I do that sometimes, like, I mean, especially like say Sunroof, say like there's something, when I listen to you, something deep happens within me. So that's why I tend to level everything to that and say like, well, if it's happening deep within me, if there's some kind of I'm having this emotional experience, everyone should be. When it's like, well, maybe, I don't know, some people do, some people don't, some people are just there in the moment, being part of that sound, so whatever, right? It doesn't have to be this like singular experience that I am talking about.
Well, I'm glad you have that, some kind of experience, which is always very nice to know, because everybody has a different view of it. Then all kinds of music. I mean, for us, there's always good surprises, because we quite often don't really listen to what we do very much once we've recorded it. And I forget, and I think it's the same for Gareth, but we forget what we've done. We forget some of the pieces. You play some of it back, and it feels really good, because it feels like somebody else did it to me, because I don't remember any part of the process. And I probably remember going around to Gareth's studio and turning on the modular, and that's it. And I don't know which bits I played. I don't know which bits Gareth played, and it doesn't matter at all. But hearing something that you've created, because it says it did on the file, it says you created this, but not know it, but not remember anything about it, is really a really nice feeling if you enjoy it. Sometimes I go, ooh, but so I'm not really. I'm really just talking about how I feel when I listen to what we create.
Of course, it's abstract what we do, I would say, in the sense of in the sense of abstract painting. There is no. I don't know. I've never written a pop song. Daniel has, of course, written a pop song, but I never have. So, but with a text and so on, it's possible to imagine that with some songwriters there is an actual message that you're trying to convey, a concrete, and so far I think of Sunroof as abstract painting. It's not there is no single meaning to it. You inhabit the sonic space, and some people take the headphones off immediately and go, is this music? And some people are engrossed and engaged and love it very much. It's in the same way that people looked at. I mean, I don't mean to put Sunroof on the same level as the great abstract painters, but in the same way that people looked at Picasso or Jackson Pollock or something and said, well, that's nonsense. That's not painting. Anyone can do that. Or,
my 5-year-old can make that music.
There you go.
which is probably true.
I mean, going back, were you always present people in the, when you were kids, when you were teenagers? Were you there? Were you in your bodies, or were you kind of just like not?
I mean, I was definitely in a daydreamer. I wasn't I wasn't a very physical person in that sense. I don't think I was I was in my own moment somehow, but not in the moment of what was going on around me. I was a daydreamer, really, which was probably good and probably bad. I don't know, it had some good points and some negatives. It wasn't very good for my education. Well, actually, that's not true. It wasn't very good for my schoolwork, but probably quite good for my education. I didn't do very well at school.
What about you, Gareth?
I don't know. I was rushing as a teenager. I suppose I was just rushing through life, longing to embrace new experiences. I wouldn't say I was. I think I started to learn about being present in the moment with my experiments with psychedelics in the 70s, in the early 70s, as I discovered LSD, really. I think that gave me a great perspective on connection and presence. So as well, the value, obviously psychedelics can be challenging, and they need perhaps one of the best things is to experiment with them in a support network, but they can be profound teachers. And I was lucky in the sense that I was able to take some profound teaching from psychedelics when I was young, and that really changed my life.
Like in a real paradigm shifting, you can say I'm different, things are different for me through this.
Yeah, I would say that. I would say that it was that was part of my growth process that made me realize I could pursue this dream of making recorded music as a life's work. Maybe you can't do an A/B comparison in life, can you? You did what you did, and what happened. But to looking back, I think it was this turning on, tuning in, and dropping out allowed me to pursue an alternative path. Now it doesn't feel that alternative. It just feels like I'm a, mini corporation with my one-person business in my little studio. But at the time, this was an very alternative path I took.
Yeah, you're the man now,
Yeah, I'm the old white guy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I'm curious about a lot on the show are these existential choices, right? And especially, you're teenagers in the 60s into the 70s, right? And what are the choices that are afforded you at that time? You said, Gareth, that you're from the emerging middle class, right? What, were you said you have to do a certain thing? Did your parents tell you had to do a certain thing? Same thing with you, Daniel. I know your parents were actors. I mean, were they still actors after they had come over from Austria? Were they still actors in London?
Yeah. And I never had pressure to pursue some kind of, I suppose some people in the acting profession, because it's so unstable, would say you've got to go to university, you've got to get a law degree or a medical degree, or they might say, "Oh, darling, you must go into show business." I had no pressure whatsoever. My father died when I was quite young, but my mother was, and I'm sure he would have been too. But my mother was very supportive of my endeavors, So no, I never had pressure. Plus, that's I think the difference between Gareth and I was I grew up in London, and I went to what was known as a progressive school. So it wasn't like a very formal school, and it was there to try and develop people's, rather than trying to stick to a specific curriculum. It was more about finding what people's skills or talents might be and trying to develop them. And so that was good as well. When I say I didn't do well at school, I did well in the sense of I think that I was able to use in the limited way that I could, without any negative pressure, to use the things to be in a band at school. I also got into filmmaking as well. And that's what I ended up doing. I went to film school. So that was a direct. I thought I was so hopeless at music that I needed to do something else. That was number 2 on my list, was film. So I did that for a while. But sorry, Gareth, you go.
Oh, well, I felt I had a different kind of pressure. My father was a keen amateur dramatics guy. So he was an English teacher at high school. So clearly he was very interested in the arts, but they never saw it as a career path. You know, my father was one generation out of the mines kind of thing.
Mm.
So he was, got educated after the Second World War because he was a survivor, and he came back and there was money for the survivors to go to college. So my parents were dead keen on me being like a doctor or a teacher or a professor or even a lawyer. Something a bit more up the middle class chain than they were as humble teachers. So in my parents' house, pop music, pop art was rubbish. What was considered to be art was classical music, probably not much later than the early 20th century, and high art, if you like, or fine art, whatever. So this felt like a bit of a rebellion, and my parents could see that I was intent on taking this path, actually. And after I left college and it was clear that I wasn't going to pursue an academic career, I did get some help from my father in getting an interview for the BBC, where I got my first job. He knew one of his ex-pupils was head of sound at BBC Scotland, and he made sure I got an interview for a job. So my father was supportive in that he could sense that this was important to me, this alternative route that I was trying to carve out for myself. But they never really got it until I started making more money than they did. And at that point, they were like, oh, well done, dear. And then they accepted it. I was lucky enough to take my parents to a big Erasure concert somewhere, when I was working with Erasure. And there were like 10,000 people there or something. And they were like, oh, I get it. It's show business, like amateur dramatics, but on a bigger scale or something, So, but it took a while. But, we finished up friends.
Yeah. I'm also interested in, you're both kind of thrown into post-war Britain. The world changed in the same way. I think of this in America because I was thrown into Reagan's America. Like Watergate had just happened the decade before I was born, and America had gone through this like weird kind of I don't even know how to, like, paranoid government conspiracy type feeling. And then suddenly I'm in Reagan's America and everything seems great. And then as an adult, I can look back and be like, oh, everything was awful. Like, and a lot of times when I talk to people that are close to my age, I can say like, oh, well, you had the same kind of experience with Thatcher. But I am curious, what was the experience of, like, you were, as kids, as teenagers, there was this this war, it just happened like on your doorsteps. Was it present still in the atmosphere, or was it just like, this thing that happened in the past? It might as well have happened in the 1800s.
No, well, for me anyway, it was quite present, partly because London was heavily bombed during the war, and there was still a lot of bomb sites around, bombed out buildings that hadn't been rebuilt. And also, almost every day on the news, there was something about an unexploded bomb was found somewhere. You got to clear the area, that kind of thing. So it was very much like that. And on the other side, from my parents, I mean, they didn't really talk about it too much when I was very young, but obviously the war had a big effect on them, and ultimately indirectly to me as well. But of course, when I was 5, 6, 7, it seemed like a lifetime ago. The war. It was I was born in 1951, so it was only 6 years after the end of the war, which is nothing. Do you know what I mean? It was like the last 6 years had gone by. So So yeah, it was present, and I mean, there wasn't really rationing anymore. Maybe there was rationing when I was very young, but there was, I mean, you couldn't get there. There were certain things you couldn't get, but you didn't really miss them because, I mean, getting bananas was tricky, for instance. Um, and the consumption was much more basic, but I didn't really think of that as a negative. It just was how it was. And there's one flavor crisps when I was growing up, or chips, as you would say in America. But so yeah, the bomb sites were quite, and they were playgrounds, especially in the East End. Where it was around the docks and everything, where there was a lot of damage. But that soon went to that, unrecognizable today, of course, but they soon went away, the bomb sites, and people were rehoused outside London to places like Basildon, where Depeche came from. That was a classic post-war new town for East End. East End was a big slum, a horrible, very poor slum area, and was also heavily bombed, I think, because it was near the docks. And then he built these new towns like Basildon and shipped people out, built factories built out there, out of the city. Yeah.
What about you, Gareth? How was it in the north?
No, I was in the Midlands. I wasn't really in the north. I was born in Lancashire, but I grew up. I lived with my parents. I went to school. I always don't feel I mean, I'm still growing up. I don't feel I've grown up yet, but so. But I went to school and lived with my parents in a small English market town where there were no bomb sites. Obviously, my father had served in the war, and my mother had worked in a munitions factory in the war. Then very different, very different history from Daniel's parents, but very engaged in the war as well. And like Daniel's parents, didn't really talk about it. Certainly, I never was able to speak to my mother or father about their war experiences. But for me, growing up, it seemed it could have been the 18th century. It could have been the 1800s, like you said. It's only now looking back, I think, well, I was born in 54, 46, I think the war finished in Burma, where my father was. 8 years I was born, 8 years after that Holocaust across the Europe and the Far East, and that's an incredibly short time, and we've all grew up in that atmosphere, but I just didn't know anything about it. As children, I suppose we were lucky enough to be nurtured and protected by our parents and fed and clothed and kept warm, as well as warm as you could be in 60s Britain. And, it was, of course, it was very different times from now, but I didn't feel it was coloured by the war growing up. Even into my teenage years, when we learnt more about the war, I still thought it was in the deep past, the far gone eons of history. It's only as I got older and into my 50s and 60s where I just thought, well, my God, what were they all labouring under? What trauma had they all been through?
Yeah.
What losses had they all had? And how much that's influenced our whole culture, really, and obviously the families that we're all part of. It must have been a huge, huge influence. My parents, the closest they got, I lived in Berlin for 10 years, and my parents came to visit a few times, and I tried to talk about war experiences. The closest they could get was to give me works of art by Benjamin Britten's War Requiem, for instance, is a legendary piece of music, and the Wilfred Owen poems from the First World War, Sassoon, Siegfried Sassoon and Wilfred Owen. This is their way of trying to convey to me their war experience, and it wasn't really what I wanted to hear, obviously. I mean, I have enormous respect for Benjamin Britten and Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon, but I wanted the personal stories from my mum and dad, and I never got those because I guess it was widely dispersed in that generation. That most of them didn't talk about it. It's not the kind of thing you could talk to children about, or even wives.
When I was very young, I couldn't tell you, maybe 5 or so. I'm coming home. Somebody at school had mentioned Hitler, and my parents hadn't said anything about Hitler to me at all by that age. And I said, Mummy, who was Hitler a bad man or something like that? And when my parents were standing in the kitchen, they kind of looked at each other as though I just asked them about how a baby's born, like that kind of, how do I answer this question, And they said, yes, he was I can't remember what they said, but it was a very general thing. But later on, my mum was okay to talk about her experience, because she had she was a refugee, but they had different experiences. They had quite different experiences. But my dad didn't really talk about it too much, but my mum did, and my aunt, who came over to the UK in the Kinder transport, which was the children's transport from. She's happy to talk about it, and they all had like incredible stories.
I mean, what years did your parents come over?
My mum came over in 1938, and my dad came over in 1939, so shortly before the war, both. And my mother had made 2 attempts to come over before that, but not been let in. But eventually did, yeah.
Do you mind if I ask, what were their clues that things were getting bad enough that they should leave?
They weren't really clues. They were actual things. It was the Anschluss, that when Hitler marched happily into Austria and whenever that was, 38, I think. And everything changed overnight. People who were friends, non-Jewish friends, turned against them. They weren't allowed to go to work anymore. I mean, everything changed overnight. My mother was actually not in Vienna. She was in Salzburg, and I think she got a phone call from her parents saying, "Get out now." And my dad had some bad experiences, but got out. So
I ask this stuff because I'm very curious about the vibe, the atmosphere when you're growing up, and how that pushes you in certain directions. Is it an open? Daniel, you're literally living in a place where you can see the actual damage of the war in front of you. And Garrett, that's a little more hidden for you in the Midlands, right? And I'm curious if these, yet you both went in kind of the same direction. And I'm curious if there were certain things open to you, if there were certain things that were closed to you. I've been told before by a lot of guests that it feels like by the time you get into the 60s, the kind of, let's say, repression or the kind of cloistered feeling maybe from the war exploded. And that's what explains the 60s. And I don't know if that's just anecdotal or if was your experience too, but I am curious. I know that's just a general prompt, but
my experience, if I may, is that I definitely, I definitely felt a lot of things were possible. So I wasn't. So in a sense, the nurturing and the upbringing I had, in spite of all the challenges and negativity about what's art and what isn't, brought me to a place where I didn't feel frightened to just go out there and try stuff. Perhaps it's partly to do with the welfare state and the free education that we had at that time, and the boom starting to happen, the emerging prosperity, the the whole swinging 60s thing, the punk ethos of very much do it yourself. I was never a punk, but I took that we can do it. I took from that. So there, I even as a late teenager, and I wasn't at university, at college, thinking, oh my God, I need to get a job, otherwise I'm going to starve. I felt that I was in a world where it was possible for me to come down to London, bum about a bit, and try and find a way to get into doing what I wanted to do. And it turned out that was actually possible. But even before it happened, it felt like it could be possible. So somehow it was a very open and productive and creative kind of atmosphere towards the end of the 60s into the 70s.
And in the middle and in the beginning of the 60s as well. I mean, you had a lot of people, obviously all the bands were mostly from working class families who were, and then you had a lot of artists and writers and filmmakers were doing work, kind of what we call in the UK kitchen sink dramas, which is very down to earth things. There were people like David Bailey, photographer. Things seem to be opening up. I mean, I can't put my finger on it exactly, but certainly I had the same feeling as Gareth, really, is that I felt that I wasn't tied down to it. I mean, before it was really, I mean, it was very regimented really before that. And, you went to school, there was no such thing as a teenager. You went to school, you got married at 18 or 19, you had your first kids when you were 20, you had a job for life, and that was it. I mean, the swinging 60s was very London centric. I think there's a huge difference between London at that time and say, well, anywhere else, basically.
Evesham.
Yeah. Or Manchester, or a big industrial town where I don't, I think they looked on, I mean, but 90% of Londoners swinging 60s didn't really have much impact, to be honest. It was it was all over the press. It was in all the magazines, and you knew about all the models and the musicians, and it was a great scene. But most people weren't. They knew about it, and then maybe they were entertained by it, and maybe they wanted to join it. But for most people, it was just it was a period of prosperity, for sure.
Yeah.
The white heat of technology, or whatever Harold Wilson said at the time. England won the World Cup. That seems like ridiculous, but something like that was like huge at the time. And there was the first Labour government since just after the war. There'd been Conservative government all the way through the 50s and early 60s. And then there was Harold Wilson came in, who felt like, I mean, even though I was very young, I was kind of excited by it. It felt like that was something modern and forward thinking rather than the old kind of conservatives, so there was, I guess it was a prosperous time.
And I must underline what Daniel said about television. He's right. The swinging 60s didn't happen in Evesham, the 12,000 person market town that I was growing up in, but television did. We got a television when I was about 12, about mid 60s. My parents got a television, and there was at that time, the BBC, our national broadcaster, wasn't frightened of government, and there was a much more felt, certainly from my teenage perspective, as a hand-in-hand thing. The amount of cutting-edge drama and music that there was on the radio and television was truly incredible, and it reached the nation because, of course, there was only a couple of networks. There were like three radio channels and 2 TV channels or something at the beginning. So a single broadcast of a John Peel show, or an Alan Ayckbourn drama, or any of the other, of Kathy Come Home, or some kind of kitchen sink drama, as Daniel said, that affected the nation. So I think that was kind of London centric. The art was being created in London, but it was being broadcast to the nation. And that's how we picked up on it in Evesham.
But also, don't forget, from a music point of view, there was because the BBC at that time, when I was, maybe the early 60s, just around the time the Beatles started, there was very little recorded music played on the radio.
Yeah.
Because the Musicians' Union wanted there to be live music because they wanted to keep their members in work. But at the same time, there was Radio Luxembourg, which was a pop station broadcasting from Luxembourg, and everybody of my generation, the classic, listening to the radio under the pillow, so your parents thought you were asleep. And then there was the pirate stations like Radio Caroline and Radio London, which is where somebody like where a lot of late John Peel definitely started on those stations.
Okay.
And then when the BBC, they were kind of illegal, by the way, that's why they're called pirate radio. And then the BBC decided that they needed to get on board with the teenagers. So they started Radio 1. And a lot of those people moved on to Radio 1. So there was pop music around, but on the BBC, it was limited. And there was a fantastic TV show around that time called Ready, Steady, Go. which was on ITV actually. It was on the only other channel, and every week they had, you could see like the Stones were on it, the Kinks, the Temptations, the Supremes on this TV show. It was an amazing show. It was the only outlet for pop music really at the time. When I call it pop music that was popular. I mean, it was kind of coming from the underground. A lot of it, pretty much straight from the Cavern Club in Liverpool was an underground club.
At the time, could you feel this sea change, or were you just in the moment and it just like, all right, this is happening? But like the creation of like the teenager as a concept, or the, this absolute opening up of culture, Gareth, you said this kind of like anything was possible. Could you sense that in the moment, or was it just this is just happening?
I think we could sense it, and I think at 16 or 17 we could sense it, and we felt we were part of it as well. Even those of us living relatively cloistered and conservative lives felt that that change was possible and change was happening, and we were going to be part of the change because we were nearly adults and we weren't going to put up with what had gone before. Now, we didn't put up with it. Whether we built anything better with this global warming, the global meltdown catastrophe that we built for ourselves, I don't know if we built anything better. But at the time, we thought we could.
Yeah, definitely. And because I'm just those couple of years older than Gareth, this all happened when I was younger, and definitely felt it. It really felt like it was a huge change. I mean, I remember I was, hearing about, the first teenagers I heard about really were the ones, this is when I was very young. First of all, the motorbike, the motorbikers. And then there was when there were fights in the cinema, when there was like what was his name? Chuck Berry and the rock and roll films that were around at the time. Bill Haley and the Comets, especially. He came over to play in London quite early in the 50s, and people were slashing the cinema seats, and that was a real, it felt like a teenage explosion, which I guess had never happened before. I don't know, but yeah. So I felt it definitely. Definitely, and it was exciting, and it really fueled my daydreams.
Well, okay, so that's interesting. Did you both ride the wave? I don't know if this is answerable, but I'll ask it anyway. Did you ride that, like, this fits who I am? I think this makes sense for me. Or do you think you mutated through it? Again, I don't know if that's answerable, but I'm curious.
I always felt like a bit of an outsider, partly because I was quite shy at the time. I still am quite shy, but I wasn't one of the trendy gang. Do you know what I mean? I was slightly less trendy gang. There were people in my class at school who were definitely much more engaged in it than I was. But I was as an observer, I could really feel it, rather than live it. And as time went on, I got disillusioned with it musically a bit and whatever. But it was sort of 62 to 66, 67 was an amazing period.
Yeah.
Music.
What about you, Gareth? Did you feel like Daniel, I think that's interesting you say, because I've always felt like an observer, and I've always then unconsciously, I think pretty much sought out context, specifically artistic context, where I don't feel like an observer, where I could actually feel part of a thing, part of a collective in the moment. And I find those contexts to be few and far between, but I've always sought that out because I did feel like an observer.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. I definitely didn't feel like a trendsetter when I was I felt very uncool when as a teenager, like a lot of teenagers do, I suppose. But, leaving the small town, going away to college, meeting all these impossibly sophisticated kids who'd grown up in London and had artistic parents who were broadcasters or actors or, potters or meditators, all this stuff, divorced even, fucking hell. This was all like incredibly sophisticated. So it's both. Well, I wanted to ride this wave and be part of the change. There was a lot of comedy that was laughing at the traditional institutions of the UK that was important to a lot of us. And me and Daniel, I know for sure, and a lot of other teenagers at the time, we were suddenly mainstream comedy was able to laugh at the old school, but also books. As a teenager, I was an avid reader, and at school we were being introduced to works, but of progressives, I suppose, not just the great canon of like Shakespeare and Jane Austen and the old school, but the modern progressives like George Orwell and Hermann Hesse and Thomas Mann and all these kind of and just being able to enter the world of these incredible writers who are talking about being a stranger, Jean-Paul Sartre, I'm thinking of, so much too young really to be exposed to this literature, but still taking a great deal from it. So it's both. It was riding the wave and being transformed by the wave. It's both.
Yeah. We're right at the end, and I guess I'm curious, do you remember an early time or the first time where you felt like you belonged somewhere?
I think when I realized, this is a long time after with the period we're talking about, when I first realized that, I was, big fan of electronic music right from the end of the 60s right through. And then there was this sort of, it was never that, I don't know about cool, but I was always into it. And then it suddenly it was talked about in a different way, I think, in the media, which is, just around punk, just after punk. Kraftwerk were on the cover of the NM Sounds, which is, things like that. And it was being talked about in a different way. And it was talked about in a way that I could relate to. And which is when I made my first single, really, out of that kind of inspiration. I'd never really, even as a label, I always think of Mute as an outsider label a bit. I don't know. I suppose in the early days of Mute, I felt like I was quite engaged with what was going on at the time. When I had enough time to realize, and when Mute kind of grew, I just didn't have time to even think about if I was, I was just talking to pressing plants and recording studios, Yeah, there was a moment, I suppose, when I felt like that. Yeah.
You felt like you were part of culture in a way that you had not been before?
Yeah, I felt that, and because people really seemed to like the record, to my surprise, I felt like I was I was like a visible part of culture, not just a participant. Do you know what I mean? And I felt part of culture, really, I suppose, for a brief moment.
Did you like that feeling, or were you resenting, like, oh, now they're into this?
Well, there was a little bit of that, but but no, it was a nice feeling, and then I started to meet people like Cabaret Voltaire and Throbbing Gristle, and I wasn't part of a scene at all. During that period, I just made the record, but I started meeting people like Robert Rental and Thomas Lear, and and it felt good that they were like, I didn't know there were these people around, that it was good to feel there was like-minded people doing interesting things, and that was a nice feeling. Yeah, I can't say not.
What about you, Gareth?
Yeah, I had a double experience. I touched on my psychedelic experience as a student, where I felt, I belong in the world.
Oh, wow.
Obviously we were kind of a small subsection of freaks all belonging in the world together. But so that was one thing. But also later, career work connected, I definitely felt that I belonged, and I felt that somehow I was endorsed or validated by the world when I was a junior engineer, and I made a record from beginning to end with an artist called John Fox in a little studio before I met Daniel and Mute, where I was able to play a small but important role in the recording and mixing of a real record. So that was really that was the first record that I worked on from top to bottom. And at that point I thought, oh yeah, look, I've done it. I've made a record, and some people seem to like it. It was on the radio occasionally, bits of it, and so that was a moment of endorsement where I felt a validation, really, where I thought, okay, yeah, this is going to work. I didn't realize that streaming was going to hit me in YouTube and all that.
Do you think it was in the, again, I don't know if this is answerable, but I am curious and I'll ask it anyway. Do you think it was in the creation of the art in both of your experiences, or was it when it got outside validation, or was it the entire process?
I mean, it was definitely the creation of it that interested me in the beginning. I really didn't think, I really didn't think people would like what I was doing. But when you're working with other artists, when you have a label and you work with artists, you want that validation, definitely, because but I've always been interested in the process of making records, making music in general. That's really, I suppose, I'm working with artists to help them, as Gareth does as a producer, to help them realize their vision. So yeah, the process is definitely a big thing. Of course, you need to get validation when it's your own work. You don't need validation, but if it's other people's work that you're promoting in some way or other, validation's important.
Uh-huh.
I'm not saying it's not nice to get validation for our work, but
right.
We just do it and put it out and hope for the best,
Yeah.
And prepare for the worst.
Yeah. And my, I felt validated that the artist, John, who I was working with, it was really just the two of us in the studio, was sufficiently happy with my endeavors to keep paying this little studio bill in the studio where I was a freelancer and keep coming back. So that felt like an enormous validation even before the record was out. Having gone through the process and thought, well, I was very junior. I was a junior engineer, but I'd established a relationship with the artist. I'd helped him record and mix this record. We'd done a real record. It's fantastic, at that point already, having the making.
And John Fox was responsible for us working together as well, in the end.
He was. Yes, he was indeed.
He introduced us for the first Depeche record we worked on together.
Wow.
Yep.
So yeah, so then it all leads into, I love this. Then it all kind of like trickles into each other.
It does indeed, yeah. Cascades.
Yeah. Gareth, Daniel, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, and I hope this worked out well for you.
I mean, how do you feel? Are you like, oh boy, this last hour? Uh-oh.
No, it's actually I don't know. I'm sure, but it's a very different kind of interview than the ones we normally have. So it's interesting, challenging for me sometimes to come up with my thoughts. But yeah, very good. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, it was great.
I enjoyed it very much, Andy. Chatting to you and hearing what you had to say, Daniel, as well, was, as always, a revelation and super interesting. By the way, Daniel, have you still got a guitar?
Yeah.
Good. So all we need is a file.
I've got my first ever guitar.
Fantastic.
Which is a semi-acoustic, non-electric.
Wonderful. Let's use it.
In fact, somebody picked it up yesterday and started playing it. And, it sounded quite good. I was surprising. Maybe not the guitar, but the way they were playing, but still. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Andy.
Yeah, thanks again. Have a good night, both of you.
Yeah, you too. Have a good day.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.